Hey, everybody, and welcome to The Brand Called You. So listen, last week I was driving my car up to the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts. When I got to around Orange, Connecticut, halfway up from New York, I spot a sign. It says Pez Visitor Center and Museum. I almost got in a car accident. I had to screech to a halt, and I immediately got off the highway because Pez, Americans, of course, all know what it is. And for those of my global friends that don't, it's a candy that all of us grew up with. It is I suppose it's like looking at a photograph of my life. We all grew up with Pez dispensers and Pez candy, and all of a sudden there's a museum devoted to it. So I screeched to a halt. Sure enough, there I found the most incredible collection of artifacts from really dating back all the way to the 30s. And I'm very excited today to introduce our guest, who is, I would say, a total Pez specialist, a specialist extraordinaire. Shawn Peterson is not only the director of the Pez Museum and Visitor Center, but he's also a prolific collector of this very historic and noteworthy candy. He's written several volumes of books about Pez, including we'll let him tell us about it, but he's written about the history, he's written about collector's guides, and he's the education director at the center. And I'm just so thrilled to have somebody who really is such a specialist in a candy that has a lot of meaning to me personally. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, now I got to start out. First of all, I couldn't stop laughing for, I'd want to say 20 minutes when I discovered there's a name for guys like you. I believe you're called a Pez head. Are
Okay,
you
that's
are
one
you
of
a
them, certainly.
are you a Pez head?
I am, yeah. I think that's
I,
fitting.
so I tell me about, I'm so curious because first of all, I believe that everybody should collect something. I collect old playbills from plays I've been to ever since I was a child. But you collect Pez dispensers, anything Pez related. I'd love to know how you got started with your passion.
Just simply something to do. It's one of those things you just stumble upon. I'm at flea markets. I'm walking around looking at things, but I don't really know what I'm looking for. Why am I here? This is fun. I keep walking up and down the aisles, but what am I really looking for? Something to catch my eye or what have you. I mean, I had various things at that point, but nothing really focused as a collection. And just one day, something about, maybe the way it was laid out or whatever, but there was 3 or 4 booths in a row. They had little baskets of dispensers in each of them. I don't think it was anything special. They were like 50 cents a piece. That's why it caught my attention. I thought they were fun. Pulled a couple out, looked at them. Certainly characters you recognize, you know who they are. The colors, how it worked, it seemed nostalgic. I like these. This is kind of cool. I don't know anything about them, but for 50 cents, let's get a few of them and take it home and enjoy it. And that's what I did. And we got home, you line them up on a shelf and find yourself kind of keep looking at them and wondering, is there any more? And next time when you go to that flea market or a flea market, you start trying to kind of look for them. And this is 1990, so there's nothing to reference. There's not a internet or a Google as we know it to reference these things. There's no book that had been done on the hobby at this point. So it truly was going into something blind, hoping to find something great. And if you did see something, you talk to people. It's the old fashioned pen to paper. Somebody found one. Where did you find it? Oh, this guy in another state has some. He kind of sort of collects them. And do you know his name? Do you know how I can get a hold of him? Phone number, address. And you start trying to make connections with people that might have the same interest or might have extras. And you find some pen pals out there, and I've been lucky. I think that collector gene, once you realize you have it, kind of goes forward throughout all aspects of the hobby. So I'm lucky enough to have kept a lot of those early correspondence with people from years and years ago, that I would get in the mail, the envelope, the letter that they wrote, things they have, trade deals and stuff like that. And looking back, I treasure that much as some of the
Yeah.
dispensers.
Well, did you grow up with the candy yourself?
Probably. I can't say definitively. I think I have vague recollections of maybe having a couple of them. My cousin and I think, got them in our Easter baskets,
Mm,
at the holidays, or maybe a Christmas stocking, but actively pursuing them, no. Just something that I had never thought about, like a lot of the toys you have as a
yeah.
kid.
But you're clearly a history buff because you wouldn't have been walking through flea markets if you weren't, right? I mean, you must, what is it? What is, does the history kind of excite you when you see these things?
Oh, the history of the brand for sure. And that's something you learn as you get into it and start, trying to figure out the when, what, whens, and why, and all that
Mm.
sort of stuff. And it really is fascinating to go back and see, the early efforts and how they marketed and what was sold and how it changed. And then you tie it into what else was going on in the world. There was a lot of big things going on in the world, in the with the World War II and things like that. And what happened? Where did things go? How did they survive?
Yeah.
It just truly is a global product. And it's not just something so limited to just the US or just parts of Europe. It's in about 60 different countries. So it really has some global appeal.
Well, that blew me away when I went to your museum and I learned that Pez is originally an Austrian invention, right?
R- Right,
Um,
correct.
and wasn't it originally developed as this kind of smoking cessation mint?
Correct. Yeah, you're right. Mr. Haas, Edward Haas III, is the gentleman that invented Pez. He was looking for an alternative to smoking and a way to freshen your breath, and was doing some experiments with these little compressed sugar tablets and using peppermint oil at the time to flavor them. So the first and only flavor that you could get was peppermint, and his goal was to give people something else to do instead of smoking, or at least a way to freshen your breath afterwards. And, people often ask, where does the name Pez come from? And he used the name, or it's derived from the German word for peppermint, which was pfefferminz. So it's quite a long word. So Mr. Haas used the first, the middle, and last letter of that word, which was Pez, and came up with the word Pez. And it actually served two purposes. It's easily pronounceable in just about any language, and it's a trademarkable brand name. So it kind of served two purposes.
Was it an immediate hit in Austria?
In Austria, it was. He had a lot of success right out of the introduction to it. It rolled out through other parts of Europe, grew throughout the rest of the world. And it wasn't until the 1950s, 1952 specifically, that Pez was in a lot of different countries and many different places except the United States. So this was kind of the last great market for them, so to speak, to introduce the brand. And when they came to New York in 1952, the first offices were in Lower Manhattan. They imported all the goods, and they tried to sell and market it in the US as they had throughout Europe and the rest of the world. And quite frankly, it really didn't do that well. It didn't have the same reception, and people just didn't feel as enthusiastic about, having an alternative to smoking. So I think the reception kind of surprised or disappointed the company. And somebody in marketing said, you know what, let's rethink this a little bit. What can we do to maybe turn this around? And instead of adult marketing, let's shift this to children and see if they have any interest. But kids generally
Ah.
don't like strong flavors like peppermint. So they decided they would introduce fruit flavors to the candy. And then the first actual dispenser that we're kind of familiar with today wasn't invented until 1949. So they have this newly invented dispenser. It just had like a little thumb grip on the end that you could use to dispense the candy. And they said, you know what, if we put a little three-dimensional cartoon character on top of this dispenser with the fruit flavor candy, maybe we can shift this to the interest of children. And once they did that, the product just took off here in the US. And in fact, it had so much success so quickly, it kind of changed the marketing of the company, not only here in the US, but in Europe and throughout the rest of the world. And ever since then, we've been primarily a children's product.
It didn't even occur to me that it went from adult to children. There's a couple things that are going through my mind. 29 was just a handful of years before the war broke out. And I'm wondering, the first question I had was like, did, how did the war, Austria being in the middle of it all, did that result in, was that part of the reason that they had to come to America? Was there like did production have to be on hold, or did it affect people's capacity to buy after the war? Or were the factories being used for other reasons? I don't know. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, and I wish I could give you some really great stories and history on that. The records from that time are really limited. There's not a lot of pieced together uh, the best I could with what's available and in old books and things like that that the company had at the time. And from what I can tell is once they kind of got up and running, they had to retool because a lot of the sugar was being rationed for the
Hmm.
war,
Hmm.
scaled back production, things like that. And then once the war stopped or slowed, they were able to kind of rebuild the factories, find new locations or a new location for it, and resume production.
But when you were telling me the story about America and American marketing machinery, right, making those shifts, you know what it made me
Hmm.
think of? Santa Claus was originally, for example, Sinterklaas, which was a Dutch character and a character in Northern Europe that was like a bishop that came and his with his assistant, and they taught children lessons, and it was much more of a religious figure. And
Uh-huh.
when it came to America, it got basically marketing took over, and they made him fat. He was never fat. They turned him into Santa Claus, and it became much more of a children's thing. And
Yep.
it kind of reminds me of this kind of genius capacity that Americans had even then to, figure out how to sell, sell, sell. I don't know. I find that so interesting.
Take and make it our own and put our spin on it and market it to the masses. Yeah.
So did
American ingenuity.
American ingenuity, but so did they in the 50s when it was doing so well in America, was the majority of the company still owned by Austria and America was just like a subsidiary, or how did it work?
Correct. Still is. Yeah, it's still structured that way. We're still an
Oh,
Austrian.
really?
We're the North American subsidiary. We do all of the territory for the U.S. and Canada from here.
I didn't know it was still an Austrian company.
It is, yeah, still privately owned.
Really? What is it, like a family, one family,
Yeah,
or
yeah, the Haas family. Yeah, I think it's third and fourth generation now.
have you met them?
Some of them, yeah, yeah, they've made it over. They wanted to see what this visitor center was going to be. I've been lucky enough to go to Austria. I didn't get to actually meet them during the visit, but a couple of the board members, the family, they've been here.
So, but primarily the marketing strategy got taken over by America, right?
Correct. Yep.
So how did that work? Like basically, it became the center of marketing, and the rest of Europe kind of thought this is working pretty well. Let's try it here, kind of thing. Or
Yeah, let's see if we can duplicate the success. I mean, they had a successful product, but it was, very successful here in the US, beyond expectations. So they thought, why not? Let's try it here as well. And kids are kids, and they like the characters and the candy and the flavors, and just took off.
um, I was looking at in your museum throughout the ages, and in a way, I feel like it's the storybook of America, And I was looking like in the 50s when I mean, you're too young, but it was all about Martians, and we were very naive, and we believed in aliens and Martians and spaceships. There were all these TV shows, and I saw that there was a lot of stuff around space in the 50s, stun guns, and then I was just interested if you could comment on how like it reflected the times. Maybe you have some examples or.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect thought, and it truly is. And when you see everything that Pez has done over the decades, it really becomes a retrospect of what else was going on at the time, because you're truly trying to capture uh, the mind and attention of the consumer. So you want to do something that's relative, that's of interest, that people are talking about, that are enjoying. So, you mentioned the space race, and we've got astronauts and spacemen and robots and little candy shooter ray guns, and you get into the 60s and you got the psychedelic stuff. We've got a hand holding an eyeball. We've got flower flavored candy.
Wait, go back. A what? A
A hand
handful?
holding eyeball.
What's that about?
It's part of the psychedelic short line that they did. They did a flower, like a rose flower that had an eyeball in the center of it.
No
And then there's
way.
a cup shaped hand like this that has a big eyeball
Oh
setting
my
in it.
God.
And you tip the hand back, and there's a candy tablet that comes out, and it was flower flavored. So,
Flower
explain
power.
that to me, because I'd love to hear that story. I've always joked, be in the marketing meeting for that. I'm sure they use the word man a lot. They're like,
But
hey,
you know,
man, I got a great idea for this, man. It's
no,
like,
but the other thing I noticed, which it makes me feel sad in a way, is like I noticed as we got into the 90s and the 2000s, it stopped being about ideas and it was all about like marketing movies. And I feel like there are no ideas that aren't attached to some sellable TV show or movie. Is that true?
yeah,
Kind of
it's a
bothers
pretty
me
good
a little.
observation. Yeah, it's not entirely true, but it's largely true. And that we're kind of stuck in the middle on that. And what I mean by that is, sure, we're the manufacturer. We get to decide what we want to license or what we want to create and put on top of a dispenser. But truly, retail is king. So we can come up with what we think is the greatest things ever.
Mhm.
And when you go to try to sell that to the
Yeah,
retailer or the buyer at the retailer store, they're going, yeah, that's great. But what's the latest and greatest that go along with this movie or that thing, because uh, they want it in and out. They want to sell it.
and
They don't
yeah,
really care about the brand. They think it's great if it sells, but
yeah.
they want in and out. So give me the latest and greatest. And it's truly kind of what holds the brand. It's you're dictated what you make by what's going on. So
Well, I have a friend that actually is, believe it or not, his business is licensing. He sells socks, but he licenses the characters from movies and so forth.
yeah,
And he said actually like stores like Target or Walmart, they won't even consider putting your product there unless you can prove that you'll sell a certain amount of volume. Is it the
right.
same, Pez?
Yeah, yeah, very much. Yeah.
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 So
And
you
you
have
see
that
those
pressure.
closeout seasonal items, you miss Valentine's Day, you miss Easter, you miss Christmas, all that leftover product on the shelf, goes on discount 50%, 75% off. Retailers not eating that. They're billing
Right,
that back to the manufacturer. So,
right.
you may think you're going to have a great year. You sold a bajillion items into X retailer, and if it doesn't sell through that season, they're going to bill you back for whatever they have left over. So you got to kind of manage that. That's what our sales folks do.
Now, do you have different regional characters like for Austria and Europe that would not necessarily be recognizable here?
Yeah, sometimes. And that's one of the things about it being a global brand. There's different markets. The American market is probably the largest as far as a Pez consumer, followed by Europe, and Japan would probably be number three. I would say Australia would probably be fourth. They have a large distributorship in Australia, a large distributor in Japan. So they'll do different characters, things that are familiar to people in Japan, people in Australia, Europe. They do their own thing sometimes. They have different characters, different TV shows that maybe we
Yeah.
don't know, not as familiar. So they'll create those characters. And then sometimes it truly is a global effort that, we'll get worldwide licensing and
Mm.
join everybody, and you can find the same thing everywhere.
Now, what's your absolute favorite of your collection? And I understand, by the way, that a lot of the collection in the museum is your private donation. Is that true?
Well, not a donation. I still retain
Oh, you
ownership.
still retain it. You lent it. You lent
Uh,
it.
yeah, so it's me displaying my collection here, but you're right.
It's
Majority
like
of
Jay
every
Leno's garage. You just found a place to, but tell me what your absolute, you must have a few of your favorites.
There's a few favorites, yeah, but trying to identify one or a single is almost impossible. Sometimes it's a story that goes along with it that's fun and interesting. I usually decide what my favorite is when I look and see what I keep buying over and over and over again. I grabbed a few out of the display, and I'll hold these up so you can kind of see them, and you'll be like, "Oh, what are those
What
ugly looking things that you have there?"
what are
Um,
they?
these are called Erie Spectre monsters, and they're really not that old. These date to the late 1970s. But what makes these kind of special is the head on top is rubber. It's kind of a soft, pliable rubber. Uh,
Huh.
do something different in the late 70s. So they were kind of experimenting with a rubber head versus the traditional plastic head. And they produced this set. They produced a set for DC superheroes like Batman, Wonder Woman, Joker, things like that. There was a set of 6 of those. And then there was a set of Disney that they started to do, but was never released. And there's only maybe a dozen or so of each
Right.
character
Why
found
wasn't it released?
there. So those are quite rare. These can be found, but they've gone up tremendously in value here the last couple of years for whatever reason. But I like them because one, they have the rubber head, and then all of the face decorations that you see on each of these were all hand painted. So they do like little airbrush decorations on these. So there's tons of variations that you can find. You can find some that were heavily painted, some that hardly have any paint on them at all. The stem colors vary wildly in these, and what makes it even more interesting, and I don't know if anybody can see it if I even hold it up there, but on the bottom of that stem, this is one of the few that was made in the USA for a while. So that alone commands a premium. They made the stem in Vermont in the late 1970s, and then the head itself was made in Hong Kong. So they would import
Right.
the head. Somebody would assemble this here
So I
state.
have a couple of questions. Like you say, first of all, why was the Disney one never released, by the way? I'm just curious.
Well, the market was starting to change. At least, in the late 70s, there was
Yeah,
a gas shortage and petroleum prices started going up. And since
yeah,
these are rubber based, the
yeah.
cost to produce kind of went far beyond what was going to be an acceptable number for them. So they ended up going back to the traditional plastic head.
And how much would you said they're going up in value? That guy in the middle with the sunglasses, the blue one.
This
Yeah, how
guy,
much would like if you found that now for sale?
they're going for about 3 to 350 a piece right now, 350.
Oh my God.
So there's about $2,000 ish worth of Pez that I'm holding up right here.
Do you have any other ones you can show us?
Yeah, I got these. This is a one I really like too. This is from.
You have
Oops,
to
sorry.
hold it, you have to hold it towards you because we're doing, it's a little bit closer to your chest.
Oh,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
just because of the virtual screen. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is called a full body Santa, and he dates to the 1950s. And I like him just because it took me a very long time when I started collecting to find one of these. I'd only seen at that point a picture of it in a book. And for whatever reason, I thought it was way bigger, way taller than what it is in actual real life. And the first time I saw one of these, I was so surprised I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's the Pez dispenser that I've never seen. And I
Where'd you
bought it.
find it? Where'd you find it?
Market, yeah, flea market.
Which state? Which state were you in?
That would have been when I lived in Missouri. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri.
Hmm. How much would something like that, how much did that cost you? Am I allowed to ask? Is
Oh,
that
you
rude?
could. I don't know that I remember exactly. This one's kind of stayed relatively unchanged through the years. These go anywhere right now from about 100 to 150 bucks a piece. If you can find an unusual one that says made in Germany on the boot instead of made in
Wow.
Australia, those
Yeah.
go for maybe $700 or $800 because it's kind of a
Wow.
variation. So there's little subtleties like that can greatly affect the value, but something like this, a nice shape, as long as the head works and the springs are all good, things like that, 100 $150, something like that, you can find those.
What's the most expensive one that's on the market today?
Oh, there's dispensers that are like $20,000 plus that have sold
What?
for a single dispenser. Yeah,
What?
yeah, like a little political elephant and donkey from the 1960s. There's only 4 donkeys that are known. The last one sold, well, I should say they've sold between ten and $15,000 each. The little elephant that kind of goes along with it, those are probably
That's
15 to
amazing.
20,000.
Why so expensive? Just that there's so few?
So few, yeah. And if you want to be the guy to have one in your collection, that's the price to pay.
Are you still looking for something yourself?
Oh, I'm always looking, things I don't have. I'd love to have more of these monsters, more Santa Clauses, anything I don't already have, or maybe even if I do, just because I have it doesn't stop me from buying more. But yeah, it's just, what's rare and unusual. That's really what I'm looking for.
Yeah, do
The
you have
old
anything else
paperwork.
do you have anything else with you?
I can show you a couple new things. This is
Okay.
something we just did. This is kind of iconic from the early days of the brand, the little Pez girl with the pillbox hat. This was a new dispenser we just released
Love it.
exclusively site in our visitor center here not too long ago. So this is Cherry Girl. It's red. It was sold with just cherry flavor candy. One of my favorite dispensers. I think it's just such a cool little iconic looking retro dispenser. I think it's fantastic. So that's one of my favorites. We just got this one in. Came in today, going to be packaged soon as another exclusive going out. This is our candy tablet with a little face on it. We put some heart eyes on it. And this is going to be for Valentine's. It'll be another little exclusive dispenser that you can look for just on our website or visitor center. So kind of another little fun thing. And collectors, I think they love them. Sometimes they say they don't, but they're sure online trying to
Yeah,
buy them. When we release
yeah,
them, there's a big rush to the website and
yeah.
everybody trying to get their order in before they sell out.
I was curious with sustainability now and awareness of, our health and so forth. Are they considering tweaking the sugared ingredient to make it more healthy, or they're just going to keep what works, what works?
Well, right now, I think what we have works. It's like anything in moderation, it's fine. There's only 35 grams of sugar in a whole roll of candy. So that's 12 tablets. So you can eat a whole roll of candy and it's
Yeah,
35 grams of sugar. So it's really not that bad. If you just say, oh, it's all sugar, sugar, sugar,
right.
sugar. Well, it is, but moderation is the key
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
And then if you want to start tweaking it, that gets difficult. Certainly
yeah,
there's probably a sugarless option, but what is that? We've tried that in the past, and it just doesn't
yeah.
really have sales to sustain it.
Yeah. One of the other changes I noticed when I was looking at your collection is it seemed like, again, this is probably a marketing thing, but they suddenly started trying to sell them in big bulk as opposed to individual. Is that a later invention where you'll sell like a whole cluster of them or a
The
group or
dispensers of the candy,
the dispensers?
like a gift set type thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that was later. Traditionally it was only one dispenser. You bought one dispenser and you got a roll
Yeah,
or two of candy. Yeah, so the gift set where you got multiple dispensers with multiple rolls of candy, that's something relatively new. I think the first set was 2004-ish.
yeah,
Somewhere there we did Star Wars was the first time. I think there was 8 different dispensers that you could buy. It was a big gift set. They were all lined up. It had like a little window box. It was themed to what it was, and nobody had seen that before. The retailers loved it.
yeah,
Uh, from a brand perspective, it wildly surpassed sales figures of what they were thinking on it. And, it's just kind of been a thing ever since. We did that for a number of years. And then, as far as something that fits with the brand, finding something that has 6 or 8 characters that you can
yeah,
sustain long term gets kind of difficult. So we did it for a few years, and then they've kind of scaled back. Now a traditional set will usually have about 4 dispensers in it.
yeah.
Usually the main characters are themed from a show, and then go from there.
Yeah, it's funny, following the trends in other products. Again, I mentioned my sock friend who discovered that if he packaged things as huge sets with themes, that the profitability was so much greater. I think that all happened around the same time it was happening for Pez. I guess it's a combination of, kids being a little more spoiled and marketers getting a little more savvy. It's quite interesting though.
Right.
But the other thing I loved when I was reading about your history was you guys have annual Pez gatherings.
There are annual Pez collector conventions. They are hosted by collectors for collectors. The company itself has never gotten involved directly in that or mandated, specific things about it. They've just kind of grown organically over the years, and Pez is happy to help with those as they can when needed. But really, it's kind of something that's driven by the collector community. When they've had them here in Connecticut, we hosted a big group here at the visitor center. We've had them here in the past, and we've tried to roll out the welcome mat and get everybody in. In fact, one year we did a behind the scenes tour with everybody. That was quite an undertaking, and got to take everybody back through and show them how the candy was actually made and the dispensers are packaged.
Why did the factory wind up in Connecticut, by the way?
Well, when it came to New York, they wanted to see how sustainable that business would be. And it lasted 20 years in New York City and continued to move uptown as the business grew. It started in Lower Manhattan. And by the time they were looking to leave in the late 60s, early 70s, it was located in Columbus Circle. Was the last address. And they decided, the next step, really, if we want to continue to do this, it makes sense that we start manufacturing here stateside. So
Right.
how do we do that? Where do we do that? And there was a gentleman from Orange, Connecticut. His name was Roger Boyd. And he was in Europe on a reverse trade mission looking for European companies that wanted to do business in New England, or more specifically Connecticut, and was trying to entice them to, set up some kind of manufacturing. And luckily, he just happened to come across Mr. Haas. Whatever that circumstance was, they discussed options. They came over, started looking for facilities. They originally just wanted to convert an existing site, to do what they wanted to, and weren't finding anything that met the needs. And since Mr. Boyd was an Orange resident, he was familiar with the town and who the landowners were, and met with one of the families, and they agreed to sell off a parcel of their land, which is where the factory is located now. And we've been here ever since.
I only have a few more questions. I mean, I could go on and on, but did COVID really wipe you guys out, or was it good for you?
A little of both. It's the panic that sets in when all this is happening. We're getting orders back from retailers because retail stores are in some cases limiting what people can buy or where they can buy it, and essentials only. And how do you determine what's an essential and things like that? So the wholesale business was kind of making it up as we go. We were kind of doing the same. Our visitor center wasn't deemed an essential business initially. It was kind of fell under the like a museum type attraction. So we did close our visitor center for 3 months, maybe 4 months. I don't really remember, but thankfully for us, we had the online piece of the business, and that's really what we focused on, at least with myself and our staff over here. We didn't have to let anybody go. We just reshifted and moved everybody to the online aspect. And thankfully, customers or consumers supported us. They went online, they bought their Pez.com merchandise. We shipped it to them, and ended up being a good thing for the online business, and hopefully grab some new customers through that.
And luckily you weren't manufacturing overseas. That was the biggest thing, right? Because you didn't have
Right.
to. Yeah.
Well, we still were manufacturing dispensers overseas. They're still imported, but the candy's made domestically. We make that
Yeah.
here in the factory
Yeah.
for all of the US and Canada. Operations continued. There was no
Yeah.
glitch. We had raw material. We had everything we needed. We just needed orders and customers, and
Okay.
luckily we had that. There was certainly bumps along the way, and you're making it up as you go. But I think we came out stronger, a little leaner, and ultimately probably, I don't want to say a good thing in hindsight, but it was I guess a good thing for the company business wise.
Yeah. So before we conclude, any plans to write any more books, or what are your plans for both yourself and for the visitor center?
Oh, well, hopefully the visitor center, I want to continue to grow attendance. The whole idea of this initially was to help get people interested in the brand, get them enthusiastic about Pez and hopefully want to collect. And that's really the goal now, is just to have as many people visit, come and enjoy. It truly is a fun little distraction for a while. You found it going up and down the highway. I hear all the time, the highway's jammed up. We're in such close proximity to 95, the major north-south artery here in the East Coast, that, it doesn't take much to get traffic to a standstill. So people will hop off. They come here for a little leg stretch. Like you said, they weren't expecting to be here, but, they walk out, they've got a smile on their face. They're delighted. They had a little fun. They got a couple of characters that they recognize, and that's truly the goal, is to continue to share this. I think my book writing days are done. I've said everything I can say about the brand. I've done collector guides. I've done the history. I don't think there's a whole lot left that I can say on it, and hopefully turn those reins over to somebody that wants to be a little more ambitious, because, man, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Well worth it. I enjoyed it so much, talking to you. I really learned so much, and I can't wait to bring my friends back to your visitor center. So I'll be sure to look you up, and I'm excited.
You are welcome anytime. You make it here, please ask, look me up. I'd love to say hello.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You're my first Pez head, so I'm very, very happy about that.
All right.
Thank you, and all the best to you. I really appreciate your taking the time. It was wonderful.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.